You know, it's funny how you can wake up on days and think it's going to be a good day and everything's good. And hearing about the suicide it's really hard on me. In high school, you kids go through a lot of stuff, and I was definitely bullied a lot when I was a kid. And so I know what it's like, and I really can't stand bullying. So there's like anger in me about it. Every time I hear it, I just, And I lost a childhood friend. I thought he was doing fine. I didn't know he was doing fine. He couldn't get a job after college, and none of his friends knew, and he killed himself. And I lost another friend after in college. I'm not sure what was going on in his life, but he killed himself. And so I remember my sophomore year was really bad, and I had a lot of severe depression, I guess now I know the word. And I did a lot of crying. Possibly why I don't cry too much anymore. I cried all my tears in my sophomore year. And I did consider killing myself. And I used to walk around the campus because I went to boarding school. And I would look at the buildings to see which one would be a good one to jump off. And luckily, I overthink things, and I heard stories about people surviving falls and stuff, and I didn't want to compound one trouble with another, so it never happened. But I want to say to teachers and parents that sometimes you never know what your kids are going through. And sometimes they say, kids are bullying me, and you just think, it's no big deal. But in school, day in, day out, you got to go through this. It's really tough. And, my parents had no idea that I was thinking like this. And, I went to boarding school, so I got to tell you, my teachers didn't know. My friends who I hung out with didn't know because I internalized everything. I still do. But if somebody does actually say something to you or acts different, just ask and just kind of be aware because you don't know. Sometimes by the time they call or they say something, you really just have minutes and hours because some have been thinking about it for a long time, and you got minutes and you got hours. So today is also day of funerals to my high school teachers. Their funerals are today. So, and they were one of my favorite teachers. So I'm carrying too much emotion, I guess, for the day. And I guess that's why I went through all my songs, and I just didn't want to sing any of them. And I settled on this, and I guess I kind of understand now why. And I wanted to read this from John chapter 14 as an encouragement that Jesus said. But I want to say that also when I thank my parents because, and please don't tell my parents, it's over and done with, that they had us pray every evening and every night, and that habit was instilled in me so that even though I was away at high school and I didn't actually believe, I thought God was mad at me and that he wasn't listening to me and he didn't care, I still prayed anyways, just in case tomorrow would be better or just in case he would listen, but, I didn't really believe he was listening, but I was praying anyways. And I'm here today. So instill in your kids the habit of prayer, and it'll help them even when they don't really believe exactly. So let not your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Coming a day when no heartache shall come, no more clouds in the sky, no more tears to dim the eyes. All is peace forevermore on that happy golden shore. What a day, glorious day that will be. What a day that will be, when my Jesus I shall see, when I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace, when he takes me by the hand and leads me to the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be. There'll be no more sorrows there, and no more burdens to bear, no more sickness and no more pain, no more parting over there, and forever I will be with the one who died for me. Oh, what a day, glorious day that will be. Oh, what a day that will be, when my Jesus I shall see, when I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace, when he takes me by the hand and leads me to the promised land. Oh, what a day, glorious day that will be. What a day that will be, when my Jesus I shall see, when I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace, when he takes me by the hand and leads me to the promised land. Oh, what a day, glorious day that will be. Oh, what a day, glorious day that will be. That will be.
Well, it's certainly been quite a morning. And it's a reminder, really, that the church remains a sanctuary that one cannot replicate. There are so many other attempts. There are all kinds of support groups, organizations, community groups, and all are fine. They all have, they all do good work. They save lives. But there is nothing quite like the church. I have, over the years, as a pastor, been able to observe that the church is beyond you or beyond me. It is something, it is an entity that God has created because God knows what we really need. All those who follow such things know that a belief, a faith, contributes significantly to a person's well-being. Outside of what we have experienced ourselves as spiritual/religious people, those who do the research know that it is a significant contributor to our overall well-being, our mental health, our physical health, in every other and in so many other ways. And so you see it demonstrated here in a very powerful way this morning. And I don't need to say, I feel like I don't even need to say anything now. I mean, Sister Janibel and the others have just done it all. It's been said, it's been demonstrated in very powerful ways. But we're going to, since I'm supposed to, and if I just sat down, you wouldn't feel satisfied, right? You'd think I need to say something. We will say something that hopefully will be a blessing to us. Our time is fast spent, so I won't be long, but I want, this is the month when we celebrate Black History Month, the month of February, right? And I feel like the theme that I have selected today is one that is able to bridge that gap between history and spiritual, and our spiritual aspirations and what God means to us. We're not just about the fact that the history happened, but also history looked upon from the perspective of our own spiritual and religious heritage. And so our theology and our history must merge as we reflect on God's leading in our lives. So we're going to spend a few minutes doing that. I want you to go directly with me. I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 25. Leviticus chapter 25. And I have been fascinated with this institution for a very long time. And by that I mean what we're going to read about here. Leviticus chapter 25. And we're going to start reading from verse 1. I'm reading from the New International Version. I'm going to read quite a few verses, but it's necessary to build a foundation for what we're going to say. Starting at verse 1, the Lord said to Moses at Mount Sinai, speak to the Israelites and say to them, sorry, I'm not going to start there. Yeah, why not? Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years, sow your fields, and for 6 years, prune your vineyards and gather your crops. But in the 7th year, The land is to have a year of Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land is to have a year of rest. Verse 6. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you. For yourself, your male and female servants, and your hired workers, and your temporary residents who live among you, as well as for your livestock and the wild animals in your land. Whatever the land produces may be eaten. And then verse 8. Count off 7 Sabbath years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7 Sabbaths amount to a period of 49 years. Then have the trumpet sounded everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement, sound the trumpet throughout the land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you is to return to your family property and to your own clan. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. Do not sow and do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the untended vines. For it is a jubilee and is to be holy for you. Not only what is taken directly, eat only what is taken directly from the fields. In this year of Jubilee, everyone is to return to their own property. And going down now to verse 23. The land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers, your tenants. Throughout the land that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land. Interesting. God is instituting something called Jubilee. The word Jubilee is a transliteration of the Hebrew Yabil, which comes to us as Jubilee. The word literally means sound the trumpet or the trumpet blast. What happened was God said to his people, on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement, itself a significant day in the calendar of Israel. God said on that day, the Day of Atonement, you know the day, Adventists, if there's one thing Adventists know about is the Day of Atonement. On the Day of Atonement, because see, the Day of Atonement itself is supposed to be a time of purification of the temple, so that all the accumulated transgressions of the people would now be cleansed. And so that day meant that Israel was supposed to be free of the oppression of sin among them. So God says, on that day, when all the people have gathered together from every corner of Israel, everybody would come up to Jerusalem on the Day of Atonement. God says, on that day, when all the people are together and the purification has taken place, God says, sound the trumpet to signal the opening of Jubilee. Not only that, It wasn't just because the Day of Atonement was every year, but the year of Jubilee was once every 50 years. See, because now, as we read, every 7th year was supposed to be a Sabbath rest. It was a Sabbath of Sabbaths. The 7th year was supposed to be like what you do every 7th day. Because we know, as Bible students, you know the significance of 7, right? The number of completion. So God says 7th day rest, 7th year rest. But see, that 7th year rest was for the land. The 7th day is for the people. The 7th year is for the land. Let the land rest. Don't plant anything. In fact, God says, this is huge for an agricultural people, right? This is really huge for agriculture. You must plant, otherwise you're not going to eat. But God says, on the 7th year, don't plant anything. And when the people ask, how is that going to be? God explained. God says, on the 6th year, I'm going to bless your crops so much that it will last for the 7th year and the 8th year. Because see now, you won't plant on the 7th year, but you'll plant on the 8th year, so you still won't have anything growing. You'll just be planting on the 8th year. So God says, I'm going to give you enough, not just for the 7th year, but also for the 8th year. And so you will start reaping your crops on the 9th year. So God has planned the whole thing, and he explained to them. Now he says, 7th year, rest the land. Don't plant anything. Let it rest. Furthermore, see, that 7th year rest of the Sabbath also is an indication, God says, that the land is mine. It's not yours. It's mine. Your tenants, your strangers, is my land. So don't behave as though you own it. On the 7th year, leave it alone. Of course, there's good agricultural scientific reasons for that too, but we're not going to go into that part. Letting the land life follow. Now the Jubilee. God says, count off another 7 sevens. Just like Jesus said, not only 70 times, but 70 times 7. And there are a number of intensive multiplicational ideas like that on the feast, during the feast cycle, that you can spend some time figuring out enjoyable stuff. But God says, count off 7 Sabbath years, which gets you to 49. And on the 49th year, on the Day of Atonement, sound the trumpet. Because now, Jubilee has begun. On Jubilee, good things happen. On Jubilee, people were to return to their home. On Jubilee, if you had something that belonged to someone else, you returned it. On Jubilee, if you have slaves who were God's people, you let them go. Jubilee was a time of liberation among God's people. It was a time when people were to be set free from the burdens that they carried. Jubilee was supposed to be a time when God's people would experience what it truly means to be a follower of God. When they would have a foretaste of what it means to live in true liberty. Now, I think about that, and I ask myself, what would it be for us to have a Jubilee year? The Jubilee year among the Jews was referred to as the year of God's favor, Jubilee. Because Jubilee meant that slaves would be set free. See, among them, if you were poor and had to mortgage your property, then somebody would own your property. See, among these agricultural people, land meant everything. They didn't go to an office building and sit behind a desk, with a computer and a phone, say you're doing a job, and then you stay there all day. I'm digressing here, but I have a problem with this 8 to 4 and 8 to 5 working thing. How do you feel? Should somebody own so much of my life that I go to their place 8 hours every day? It boggles my mind. I never can make sense of it. Why should I do that? But see, because God never intended that. That was never in God. What we have today is never in God's plan. You put on your clothes, your nice clothes, and you go off into a building and you sit there or whatever, and you're typing and calling people and going to meetings and playing politics and all sorts of things for 8 hours every day. And you can't leave, and you can't do certain things because the boss will tell you, you can't do that on my time. I hate that expression. You can't do that on my, what do you mean it's your time? It's my life. I feel very strongly about it. It may not mean a lot to you. I feel very strongly about such things. That wasn't God's system. In the agricultural system, the land meant people existed on the land, and the land would pass down from one generation to the other, the same land, and that's how they all lived. That's how they existed, on the land. So if things got so rough with you that you had to give up the land, it meant now that you had to go work on your land, but it was owned by somebody else. So the other person would own the land, and you and your family would still work on that land, but it would not be owned by you anymore. But in Jubilee, the land was to revert back to the original family. Now, if while you were working on the land and somebody else owned your family land, but you still weren't able to make it, you would then have to mortgage yourself, so to speak, and you would be a slave to that person. So that you would have to do whatever they ask you to do, because now you are a slave to them. But in Jubilee, they had to set you free. Not only set you free, hallelujah, but give you back your land. In Jubilee. Slavery is the worst, in my opinion, is the worst phenomenon in the history of mankind, history of humankind. Slavery means the slave has no rights. Slavery means he is bound over body, mind, and spirit, and subject to the will of somebody else. To be bought and sold, beaten, humiliated, starved, and reduced to living like a beast. No wonder the old Negro spiritual declares, before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Winston Churchill, as he faced the might of Nazi Germany, said to the English people, you may have to fight when there is no chance of victory, because it is better to perish than to live like slaves. Of course, British people have been enslaving black people for many centuries. I guess he forgot about that. But nonetheless, his admonition to the people was, it is better to perish, better to die, than to live like slaves. In Jubilee, though you were poor, though you had to sell yourself, though you had to sell your children, though you had to give up your rights as a human being, though you had to be bound over to someone else, in Jubilee, they had to set you free. Furthermore, God said to the Israelites, don't take advantage, even if someone is bound over to you, even if someone has bound themselves over to you as your slave, do not take advantage of my people. Treat them right. Even if they are your slaves, treat them well. Do you know today there are an estimated 27 million people still living in slavery? 27 million around the world. 14,000 of those are in the United States. There is slavery in the United States. The land of the brave and the home of the free. Of course, it's illegal, but it's there. But God says, whatever might be your situation, in Jubilee, you are set free. Another form of slavery today, in my opinion, see what you think of it. The new slavery is debt. D-E-B-T is debt. The new slavery comes in your wallet as a card. I call that the new slavocracy. It's ruled by the banking systems of the nations. Do you know every country today now has a central bank? Wasn't always the case. But every country now has a central bank. And you have the World Bank. And their decisions at the topmost levels in those banks determine the quality and direction of the lives of millions. They wreck countries by their decisions. They determine the quality of life of people in very poor countries. They take away the land that the people own and tell them, you must go work in a shop, make something, because what you produce on your land, we won't buy, so you won't exist. Go work in a factory for a few pennies, and lives are wrecked. The new slavocracy for you and me is called a mortgage. I got one. In fact, my wife and I have two. She has one in the Caribbean that she left there, and I have one up here. I was listening to someone the other day, and they explained that the word mortgage has the word mort in it, which is the origin of the word mortuary. And a mortgage is literally meaning a death grip. Lord have mercy. They got you. They got you by the mortgage. They got you by the personal loans. They got you by the credit cards. They got you by the payday loans. They got you by the consumer loans that you have with the big fancy cars that we buy. And they got you, of course, by the credit cards. And if that isn't enough, you have the thieves who, when you swipe your card, now can take your number from the store itself and steal what you have left. They got you, coming and going, as we say in the islands. And we all they tell me that only a small group, a very small group, the 1%ers, we're told, up there at the very top, who control everything, and the rest of us are basically just marching according to the drums they play. And for me, that becomes the new slaveocracy. But in Jubilee, God says, I will make a difference for you. I will free you in every sense of the word. That's why Jesus says, if the Son therefore has set you free. That's why Jesus says, whatever you need, call on me and I will supply. Don't rely on the bank. You know, you can't go to the bank. If you think you own the thing, don't pay next month. If you think you own it, you know, I'm going to my house. Really? Don't pay next month. I own my car. Oh, you do? Don't pay next month. In Jubilee, the ancestral property was to be restored. Jubilee, one of my favorite Old Testament theologians points out, Jubilee, as an institution, preserved the viability of the family. See, because if it weren't for Jubilee, eventually a small group of families would own all the property. Does that sound familiar? If it weren't for Jubilee, a small group would eventually own all the property. So God says, that's unsatisfactory. That should not be the course for my people. God says, in Jubilee, give it back. So, you see, because if the family didn't have the land, the family would dissipate. It would break up. The land is what kept them together. It preserved the viability of the family, passing down from generation to generation. Well, through the males. Females would have to go join another generation sort of thing. So the Jubilee preserved the family. It prevented the domination of the masses by a small group. The other day, I was reading the Virginia Slave Code of 1705. The Virginia slavery, the first group that can be considered Africans who were considered slaves was in 1619. By 1705, the Virginia Slave Code says, all Negro, mulatto, That's the fair-skinned people who thought they were better than black people, although they were black. All Negro, mulatto, and Indians. That's those who think they're better because their hair looks different. All Negro, mulatto, and Indian slaves within the dominion shall be held to be real estate. If any slave resists his master, and in correcting such slave, the slave shall happen to be killed in such correction, the master shall be free of all punishment, as if such accident had never happened. That's the Virginia slave code. So slaves, no rights. And of course, if you were to be killed by accident, accident, yeah, right, accident, the master would have no culpability. When the United States became the United States after fighting the War of Independence, the First Continental Congress, 1790, determined who was to apply for citizenship. It said, the law said, any alien being a free white person could apply for citizenship. And then it said, citizenship shall not be for slaves or Indians, because they were property and not people. That's what the law said. So they couldn't apply for citizenship. Interestingly enough, the people who fought for slavery considered themselves Christians and said that they were doing it based on the Bible. I suggest to you they never understood the concept of Jubilee. Now we come to Jesus as we try to wrap it up and make the application. Jesus says, can you go with me to Luke chapter 4? Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4, Jesus, verse 16. You know, I have read this so many, I would say hundreds, maybe even thousands of times in the days when I used to, when I was a pastor and we conducted tent evangelism. Every year I had tent evangelism. Every year I had tent evangelism. You know, Brother Pancho is shaking. He knows what I'm talking about. Dr. Gittins will know what I'm talking about, and some of you do know what I'm talking about. Yeah, tent evangelism. Ken used to do it back in Guyana. Tent evangelism every year. And we would read this verse as supporting the Sabbath. That Jesus kept the Sabbath. But we completely missed what Jesus was doing on the Sabbath. And that's what I want to direct our attention to here. Verse 16, he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, oh man, I could say this midnight. Wake me up and I'll say it. Midnight. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. He stood up for the read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. I never read this part until afterward. I never paid attention, rather, to this part until afterward. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written. In Isaiah 61, that was read in our scripture reading this morning. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That's Jubilee. In other words, Jesus now is proclaiming, Jesus is declaring unequivocally, I am the embodiment, the fulfillment, the purpose of Jubilee. Jubilee is fulfilled in me. So that if you want to experience Jubilee today, we must find ourselves connected, rooted, built up in Jesus. For he is God's Jubilee for the entire world. See, Jubilee in Leviticus was for the Israelites. It was an institution that was restricted to the Israelite society. But see, God had a larger agenda. And so that Jubilee now becomes a type of what was to come. And Jesus, of course, the great anti-type, was the one who now comes and says to you, I am the embodiment, I am the fulfillment, I am the goal of Jubilee. So that all you get in Jubilee in the Old Testament, you now get in me. And so no wonder he says, come to me, all you who are labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. See, because the land rested in Jubilee, but in Jesus, every person can find true rest. We can find spiritual and physical rest. If you think you don't find physical rest in Jesus, come to my house this afternoon after lunch as I rest in Jesus. And I am restored both spiritually and physically. You can go work yourself out all day on Sabbath. That's your decision. But Jesus gives me rest both spiritually and physically. I know Pastor doesn't want to hear that, but bless your heart, Pastor. It's the truth. Jesus is the fulfillment of Jubilee. That's why he says, if the Son therefore shall make you free, you are free indeed. And so when you are in Christ, you take your eyes off the things that the world offers you with the intention of enslaving you. Are you with me this morning? This is a difficult part here. When you are in Jesus, now, you take your eyes off the things of this world. They grow strangely dim, and you are no longer attracted by the things that the world dangles before you with the intention of enslaving you. So now I can rest in Jesus. I don't need anything to validate me as a child of God, because I find myself in Jesus. I don't need someone to tell me that I'm okay, because in Jesus I know I'm okay. I don't need someone to give me some trinket and say, if you have this, then you're part of our group, because I don't need to be part of any group. I'm a part of Jesus. I have myself. I found my validation. I found my place. I found my place to belong. I'm in Jesus. Black people don't have anything to be ashamed about. We found our identity in Jesus. Listen, if you don't have what your neighbor has, it's okay. In Jesus, you're settled. And we're not going to fall into the trap that is set before us, that because Brother Poncho has a nice place, I gotta have a nice place. Oh, it's all right. He has a nice place. He's paying big money for it. It's a nice place. I'm not going to fall into the trap of telling myself, because Brother Ken has this great situation and he's doing all right, that I should covet what he's got. That's the trap that the world sets. Now in Jesus, you're satisfied. Jesus teaches contentment. Let's learn that, black people and white people and Indian people. Jesus brings us content. I should stop there. Let us, by God's grace, a couple other points, we'll stop there. By God's grace, let us settle it in our hearts that we will enjoy our experience in Christ. We will know what it is to be a child of God. We will find our identity, our place of belonging in Him. And He will bring us the satisfaction that we need. He says, I'm anointed to bring freedom to those who are oppressed, those who are marginalized, ignored, sidelined, othered, treated as not normal. Jesus says, find your place in me. May that be our experience today, in His name.